gave the good news.
All right, I'll leave. Save the rest for last.
Okay, just as a reminder, we have Ezra now helping us out with the Q&A. Please raise your hand if you have a question. I'll call on you. Please state your name, and we're going to limit it to one question per person. Alex had would you still like to ask? Different question? Okay, please.
Alex Sheeline from Chemistry here. You almost make it sound as if these alliances, if they play out as one could extrapolate, again, as you pointed out, it may not work that way, but if it's extrapolated, that the whole Iranian Hamas-Hezbollah complex could suddenly find itself in midair, and what we've been looking at, the play that we have been watching on campuses these last couple of weeks could find themselves kind of unsupported and collapse. Is that a plausible outcome, or is that wishful thinking?
Well, I don't want to break the cardinal rule number one about the Middle East, but I will say for sure that without a doubt that if the forces of moderation get the upper hand, then it takes the air out of the tires of all the protests that you're seeing on campus here. I mean, from time to time, you get these very revealing remarks. For example, there was a remark by the foreign minister of the United Arab Emirates, which was made 7 years ago, which resurfaced this past week on social media, in which he actually told Europeans in English, he said, I don't want to work with a translator, but he said to them, pay attention to what's going to happen in your countries if you don't take care. And I'm saying this as one who knows. So, and now they replayed it, and he wrote, I told you so. So the point here is that if the forces of moderation get the upper hand, then all their arguments will be proven hollow, because this whole thing about delegitimization, it'll just prove Israel's legitimacy when they have peace and more peace with additional Arab countries. So of course the $64,000 question is, will it happen or will it not? But I think it's important also to remember that the leadership in some of these countries, they're way ahead of their people. The leadership, that has to be said. So we'll take off our rose-tinted glasses for a minute and be realistic and say this. And polls have shown also that the public is not in support necessarily, but the leadership is. And as one of my mentors once told me, and there are many here who are from the School of Government probably, that politics is to make the inevitable palatable. So let's hope that the leadership takes the charge and takes the move and goes forward, because if they do, in the hope that they do, it will really put a damper on all these demos and demonstrations that we're seeing, and it'll really put a spike in their wheels.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Alex and Etgar. Any questions? Troy back there. Yes, thank you.
As all of the speakers here today have been great and very well educated, very well connected, but as two of the more so well educated and connected speakers, I'm curious to know, and speaking of leadership, what we could do in the West, in Israel, around the world, to uplift these peaceful Palestinian voices. So Ali Abu Awad comes to mind. He was on TED Talks. I know John Aziz on The Atlantic, Hadi Hamza. So there's a handful of people that are very coexistence, very much want to find a reasonable and realistic solution. So I'm curious on what your thoughts are, either of you or both of you, on how we could help uplift those voices versus the voices we see here today, every day on social media, or coming from encampments, or I'd say nefarious Congress people.
Thank you, Troy.
Yeah, the simple answer to your question is I don't know, but I can give you an example that may illustrate how difficult it is. not for lack of an overabundance of Palestinian voices who speak to peace, but voices that are unfortunately marginalized and vilified. Years ago, I hosted a Palestinian novelist who was born and raised in a refugee camp in Lebanon, and I took a liking to him. Samir al-Yusuf, I think he came to this university when Rachel Harris was here. She introduced me to him. And I took a liking to him because we spoke the same language. I mean, he was not he spoke Lebanese. He spoke a Beiruti dialect with me. And he became my drinking buddy later on. But he gave a wonderful talk at Boston College to a packed auditorium, and he brought people to tears. Students from both sides, Palestinian students, Arab nationalist students, Muslim students, but also Jewish students and Israeli students. I mean, Boston College, Jesuit University, we don't have a lot of Jewish students, but they were there. And the hugs he was getting after the talk, instead of questions, the only people who were venomous with him, how dare you talk of peace? How dare you talk of reconciliation? How dare you say that, among the things that he said is, there's no right of return. Where am I going to return? I'm Lebanese. I'm born and raised in Lebanon. I'm not going to go to a country I don't know. Yes, he was treated as a refugee in Lebanon, but there's no return. There's no such thing. I can immigrate, but I have no desire of immigrating. So he was taken to task not by students, but by faculty. And I had to, luckily, I spoke against tenure earlier. I don't know if I really meant it, but I had tenure then, so I was able to intervene and say, no, I'm sorry. I mean, this event is for the students. It's not, you can do your, brainwashing. But to say that the task is daunting when we're dealing with a militant body, within the faculties that are, I want to say, opposed to, who are willing, let's say, who are willing to fight Israel to the last Palestinian.
And I would just add that 100% that sometimes you see that it's the Arab-Israeli speakers who are most vehemently attacked by the mob, as we just witnessed at Columbia University with Yosef Haddad, who is a prominent social media influencer, and he was punched in the face by the demonstrators. And one more point. Sometimes you find the most unexpected allies in the place that you least expect them. One recent example was I gave a talk at Binghamton University last year, and there were a group of students, Iranian students, who were the most staunch supporters of everything that was said about Iran. In fact, they said I wasn't even severe enough in my talk about what was going on in Iran. And the students who were organized the talk, they were just, dumbfounded by how really strongly and emotionally they felt about the whole issue. And they found newfound friends and newfound allies in a common cause.
Mark, please. Thank you, Frank and Etgar, for that.
I would like to play devil's advocate to you, Etgar. One can, students on the quad that demonstrate will certainly argue that Israel is making peace with reactionary regimes, that any true leftist should not, should vilify rather than being happy about what they do.
Well, of course. I mean, what do you expect they would say? That the foreign minister of the United Arab Emirates, of Bahrain, of Saudi Arabia comes out and supports Israel? So, they have nothing else to say. But the reality is that you have this juxtaposition which is so jarring and so antithetical between, on the one hand, major players in the Arab world, in fact, Saudi Arabia, which is the guardian of the most important Muslim holy sites, which carries perhaps the most weight of any Arab country now, aside from Egypt being the biggest. But they're saying one thing, and then you see a masked protester who doesn't even know where the river is and where the sea is, saying, why? And it couldn't be a bigger split. Talk about the split of the Red Sea. It's 180 degrees. So, you know, even I think the average person watching that will clearly feel that the protester is unmasked, despite the mask he's wearing.
I want to follow up just on a question. You know, it strikes me that, as you said before, the sort of Arab street has a different view than many of the Arab leadership. And I think part of that is because all of these are secret negotiations, right? Of course, perhaps the leaders are very much aligned, but if they're not outward with it, then of course the street won't follow. So what would it take for the leadership to be able to be more open? What were the conditions that would need to be met for some of the and this is for both of you as well, for the Arab leaders to be able to be more open about that with their street, with their populace?
Well, I would say that one of the most important things to stress here, I talked before about the importance of education, but in the Middle East, one of the most critical things is perception. It's perception, perception, and perception. Who is perceived as strong and who is perceived as weak? And that was one of course, the huge downsides of the failure of October 7th, intelligence and otherwise, and conceptually wise. Because if you're perceived as weak in the Middle East, then you're basically gobbled up for breakfast. No two ways about that. But if you're seen as strong, then, okay, you're viewed, they might not like you so much, but you're viewed with respect. Wow, that's impressive. In the same way that many Jordanians are awed by Israel's prowess as the startup nation, and many American visitors and American government officials who pass through Oman often talk about how the Jordanians say, wow, that's incredible what Israel's doing on the high-tech front. So how to answer your question, I would think that one of the most important things is furthering the alliances between the moderates and between the good parties, and the strategic alliance between the US as the world superpower and Israel, and strengthening that alliance more and more so that other countries can see this can be mutually beneficial. Because it's the perception. In the same way that it's so revealing how you've seen protests against America in multiple Muslim countries and various Arab countries at different times, not only during the Hamas war. And at the same time, you see the lines outside the US embassy in those same countries of people which snake blocks and blocks and sometimes miles waiting to get a visa or waiting to get a permit or waiting to get opportunity to come to America for education or otherwise. So again, it's the perception in the Middle East that's so important. So if you can do something to improve and to strengthen that alliance, that can give a push forward and encourage the leaders.
Do you have nothing to add?
There's nothing to add. You killed it.
Thanks.
Okay. Yael, yes. Ezra, can you bring to Yael, please?
My question is more, you've mentioned that the conflict is not about territory. It's really about Israel's right to exist. And that's something that all the speakers were kind of alluding to. Definition of anti-Semitism is about Israel's right to exist. So I'm wondering, how do we deal with that? How do we make progress on Israel's right to exist, especially here on campus in the West? The power that you talked about, I'm not sure is convincing. I think power in the West maybe is viewed as negative, opposite to the Middle East. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to address this from a different angle, rather than focusing primarily or mainly on Israel. I would like to bring into the mix other minority peoples of the region, because the Middle East, especially the Near East, I make a distinction, as do archaeologists, between Middle East and Near East. The Near East is not a monolith. And it's a mosaic of peoples. Certainly the Jews are among them. But there are minorities who for 13 centuries have lived as second classes. There was no citizenship, but treated as inferior chattel of the dominant Muslim empires. And with the rise of the beginnings of the new state system, in late 19th, early 20th century, these different minorities tried to deal with their minoritarian situation in different ways. Israel is perhaps the most successful example, right? It's a minority that has declared sovereignty and created a state of the Jewish people. Other minorities, like the Druze, for instance, they're a tiny minority, about 1 million people in Israel, Lebanon, and Syria. They opted for state nationalism. So in Lebanon, the Druze were Lebanese nationalists. In Syria, they were Arab nationalists. In Israel, they're Israelis. They serve in the army. I mean, they're the only Arabic-speaking community that serves in the army. Lebanon opted for to play a game between this and that. It did not create an ethnic state for the Christians, and on and on. The Egyptian Copts opted to live as dhimmis, and they're left alone. So they accepted their inferior status, and they're left alone. They don't have political aims. They don't want to have political sovereignty. They're left alone. They're discriminated against. They know their bounds. They're accepted. And I think this is the problem with Israel. Israel did not accept its minoritarian status in a world of Islam, did not accept to live as dhimmi, as overstepped its bounds. And that is part of the reason why there's this maladjustment, there's this inability for Israel to be accepted in the region, because it is against, if you will, the law of nature. I want to go back to Lebanon, because Lebanon is a perfect example of the two-state solution, right? This is Lebanon it's a perfect example of the one-state solution, the multi-ethnic state, multinational state. It was dominated for a while by Christians. Now the Christians are negligible, not necessarily demographically, but politically, it is no longer a state for them. So that's the challenge that I see for Israel today, especially in the context of speaking of a one-state solution.
I also think that you have to keep it simple, stupid, or KISS. This is critical because, there's another important lesson that I learned in all my travels and in all my speaking and in all my reporting. Never underestimate the power of stupidity. So, keep it to the fundamentals. One of the speakers earlier said, just ask people, do you, accept the whole concept of Israel as the sovereign state of the Jewish people? I mean, what you think is known is not known. that people mentioned here, how 20% of Israel is made up of, Arab citizens. All the basics, all the fundamentals. You don't even have to get, to the nitty-gritty. There's so much ignorance out there, and so much nowadays, as was said and amplified here many times by social media, there's ignorance abounds. So if you stick to the fundamentals, I think that'll help in just showcasing how really it's an existential conflict.
Okay, thank you both. Yes.
I have one quick one for each of you. So if this progresses as, and I'm sorry, your name again?
Etgar.
What is it?
Etgar.
Edgar. So I'm so sorry.
No.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And if things unfold in a way that you have been sharing, I'm wondering if you could speak to briefly just the difference between the leadership, the governments, and all, and then the people out on the street, because I know that is another thing. And then also, your eloquence was amazing, and I understand the language, how important it is to you, and I was wondering if you would also get a chance to speak to how essential the language is, particularly with all the connections that you've made, and maybe even speaking accurately as one could about a situation. Anyway, for each of you, if that's possible, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll go first. Thank you for your question. I mean, language means something, right? Today we're being taught or being exposed to the idea that, language is a construct and you can deconstruct it. And we have this whole issue of, inclusive language. And this is nothing against inclusivity. I'm a minority. I want to be included. But there is an expectation of a minority to sort of, play by the rules of the majority. I want the protection of the majority. I don't want to take over the majority or transform it or change it. And I learned this early on as a graduate student at the same school we went, in a graduate seminar on states and minorities. I came into the seminar with a master's in political science. I was full of piss and vinegar. I knew what I wanted. I study minorities. I focus on Jews and Christians of the Near East. The professor didn't have much to teach me. So the seminar was on states and minorities, and we were discussing Arab nationalism. And one of the discussants, the professor at the time, was saying how, the idea of Arab nationalism, the idea that, the peoples of the Near East and the Middle East speak Arabic and therefore they are Arabs, it's an invention of Near Eastern Christians. It is the Christians, it is Christians that introduced the idea. So I interjected and I said, I'm sorry, Professor, but the Christians are vehemently opposed to Arab nationalism. They do not see themselves as Arabs. He said, the Christians? I said, yeah, the Christians are opposed to the idea of Arab nationalism, and they don't consider themselves as Arabs. So he repeated his question. The Christians? I was like, I'm sorry, I don't understand. You're asking the same question. He said, the Christians? All the Christians? And in my mind, I was, dude, I think you need to adjust your grammar. You need to work on me. I'm talking to myself internally. I'm saying, learn how to use words. He was right. He didn't want to embarrass me. I corrected myself. And I said, some Lebanese Christians, Maronite Christians. He said, yes, you're right. So going to language, I think not necessarily only bringing discipline into our taxonomy, the way we use words, but also bringing discipline to our grammar. Okay, the way we construct a sentence, not only the words we use in the sentence. And it's a lesson that I learned very early on, and I'm a very slow reader because of this, and I'm a very slow writer because of this, because I don't want him. He's still alive. He's an elderly gentleman. I still see him once a month, and I don't want any trouble from him.
Well, I would add to that 100%. Certainly words matter. Reporting also matters. There's a whole other segment that we didn't discuss today, which is the subject of my talk tomorrow at the University of Chicago about the media war, the war of the narrative. But I mean, even if you look at the differences in reporting in the Middle East between, say, Al Jazeera, which is Qatari-based and which is so laced with propaganda, versus the Saudi channels, which are, if not supportive of Israel, then certainly balanced. So this is also something very revealing. But as to your particular question about how to move forward with this gap, this unquestionable gap between the leadership and the people, well, I would say that at the end of the day, don't forget that it's the leadership that sets the tone. That's the role of a good leader and of government in particular. So whether or not there's a lag, yes, there is, and sure there is. Don't forget, it's an uphill battle because you're dealing with decades and decades of propaganda and hate-mongering that's even now infested millionfold on social media. So it's not a simple struggle that they're facing, that we are all facing. Simple would be the understatement of the day. But they set the tone. Leadership sets the tone. So if they say, yes, we're going forward, and yes, we want to make alliances, okay, so people listen. And also, as a result of that, okay, that's not to say that there's going to be, tomorrow, it's going to be heaven, right? But still, you see things progress. I mean, what happened with the UAE and Bahrain is also a case in point. It's not like there were major amount of tourists coming from those countries to Israel, from the Gulf. It was from Israel there, that way. But at the same time, what we do see is that this G2G, the government-to-government cooperation, fester down to the people also, to the private, to the entrepreneurs, to high tech. This is huge. Even to other things, sports, arts, entertainment, culture. Those are things that really can bond people. So yes, it's not going to happen tomorrow. There's no, major breaking news that's going to happen tomorrow, but it's a long-term process. You have to have patience, you have to have tolerance, but you have to have willpower, and you have to have good leadership to push it.
Thank you. Yes. Last question.
Thank you. I have a question about if you could elaborate a little bit more on the role of the press, the media, social media, and how we can educate students about the posts they put on social media and the responsibility they have to take with that. Because I think that it really puts more oil onto the fire instead of reporting facts and trying to find a peaceful solution.
Thank you, Marie-Pierre.
Go to class and get off social media and do what you're expected to do at university. Take what is being transmitted to you and think about it critically. And stay away from somebody spoke earlier this morning, I think it was the dean, the provost, about
Vice Provost.
The inability to communicate, the relegation of human relations to emails and texts. I mean, if I may give another personal example, in my classes there's no laptops. And there are no phones, and you take notes in longhand, and it's in my syllabus, and the syllabi have to be, there's a section where they have to sign it and give me their signature that they agree, to this contract, and I guarantee them, and they thank me later on, that taking notes by hand, old-fashioned then go home and put them on your computer, create files. So you go home, you do it right away, and you will see that it's staying fresh in your mind. And then you can use then your florid language and augment it and make it more beautiful. But take notes. I think this is central. I mean, I look at, and I don't mean it in any negative way against students. I am one also, I'm still a student, but I think un cerveau se travaille à la main. A brain, you work it by hand. You write. It's your hand. It's improving even your handwriting that improves your brain. Okay? So, but I encountered students early on, holding a pen like cavemen. Holding a pen like, I'm not exaggerating. They can, the new generation, the generation of my kids, cannot hold a pen. It's like this. And to me, this is caveman style. So I think it's important to begin at this plane. And I think that, at least speaking for myself, I do my part when it comes to this. And I've been successful so far. There's no, and I give honest reasons, because when you're on your computer, on your phone during a lecture, even like this, it's very easy to, even for old timers like me, to stray, to check your email or whatever. And if you're giving a talk and I'm on my computer pretending to be taking notes and you see me smiling, that means I'm on email or something. So.
Well, this was supposed to be the last question. I mean, it's like an hour discussion about the role of media and the role of the narrative and what to do with social media. But I think that we have to be aware that this is the reality, and we can't delude ourselves into thinking that people are going to go back to old school and just go back to the way things were. But without a doubt, with the advance of technology, the brain has shrunk. This is clear. So I think that, yes, there should be still certain standards, which unfortunately and tragically are not being adhered to, as far as authenticity, as far as basic reporting, as far as journalism 101s. But tragically, we see that these are being violated day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute, not just in what's called the legacy media, but obviously on social media. This is a challenge, I think, for the next generation and for the young generation to combat this. And it's a subject of a whole nother talk.
All right, thank you both. Thank you to our panelists. Okay, well, we're going to wrap it up. I began the day by thanking all of our sponsors and students and the police department and the university, and I want to end it just thanking all of you, everyone who's here now, the audience, those who came for a little bit, those who tuned in, and some of you have been here all day. And so thank you so much for coming. It's been, certainly, as Etgar said, there's been a lot of doom and gloom, but it has to be said. Right, we have to talk about it. We can't hide from it, and we got to start somewhere. And we did. We started, and we continued, and I hope we keep continuing. Thank you all so much, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.